Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks very much for joining us for this session about Azure. And I don't know if you saw in the keynote earlier, you probably know my name's Dominic Anschutz from the One Commercial Partner team in Microsoft. And what I want to do is I want to introduce you to Vamshi, who's one of the senior program managers for the storage team in Microsoft. And he's going to take you through why Azure. And I spoke about my relationship with Zerto and what we achieved and what we've done. And now I want to show you, or I'm not going to show you, Vamshi's going to show you on what Azure has to offer you and what we've put in from an infrastructure perspective to help you create the best business continuity solution that you can get. So running it on a public cloud with a leading ISV solution from Zerto. So without taking up too much of your time, I'm going to hand you over to Vamshi, and he's going to take you through Azure. Thanks very much.
Great. Thanks, Dominic. Hi, folks. My name is Vamshi Komaneni. I'm a product manager in the Azure storage team, in the Azure Core Infra team. And as Dominic said, I want to give you sort of a quick tour of why Azure from a high level, then zoom in a little bit to compute, virtual machines, backup, DR, where Zerto fits. And then zoom back out a little bit to look at some fun stuff that we're doing around IoT and one of those, the future is really already here kind of things in real companies that are using Azure for IoT. So starting sort of at the top, one of the things that's happening with the cloud is it's a pretty big generational shift in computing that we're all living through, including Microsoft. Things are going to change quite dramatically, are going to continue to change for every business on the planet in terms of being able to engage their customers in new and different ways from what was, in a digital way, from what was traditionally sort of, brick and mortar businesses, if you will. Allowing employees at each of these companies to be far more productive and do, things in new ways. And finally, ship transformational products, right? So the kind of, as you'll see later with the IoT stories, the cloud really opens up completely new ways of doing things that just weren't possible before. It's not just a lift and shift kind of play of getting rid of your data centers and moving over to a public cloud. We have great penetration in terms of companies using the Microsoft Cloud already. Over 90% of all Fortune 500 companies use the Microsoft Cloud. These are just a few of the logos of the companies across the world that are using Azure and using the Microsoft Cloud today. And what the Microsoft Cloud means is it spans a lot more than Azure, right? We really have this sort of unique view as a cloud provider where we're able to help companies and businesses, really starting with things that like Office 365 and Dynamics for business processes, as well as what you would traditionally think of as the cloud, with moving your application workloads and changing those over time from IaaS to PaaS and SaaS workloads, and also the new sort of paradigm around doing more with your data. Collecting a lot of data, running it through data analytics, running it through machine learning models, what we call Cortana intelligence on our side in terms of that enriched suite of services that enable you to get much better insights on large amounts of raw data. And doing all of this in a way that is still very, very secure, very trustworthy, and has ease of management for you, all of you, as customers or IT administrators that are using the cloud. Our promise across all of these different workloads is to build a global, trusted, and hybrid cloud. And let's look at each of those sort of adjectives and look at what we do around each of them. So starting with global, global is for us about regional availability. It's about the scale of our global network and frankly the sheer size of our data centers that give you economies of scale and that infinite capacity that you think of when you think of the public cloud. So we have today 38 regions around the world. Each of those dots is a region which has multiple data centers that make up our cloud. And our philosophy here is, have our data centers where our customers are, so we can have the public cloud but still respect the geopolitical boundaries, the compliance, the regulation, the data residency requirements that go with being in a specific region. We have a lot of fiber connecting all of these regions, both within the regions as well as inside the regions, for very, very high speed connectivity between our DCs, in our DCs. But we also have the largest selection of telco partners that we partner with to bring private connectivity from your enterprise into our data centers. So Express Route is a service that we have that allows you to provision a private link up to 10 gigabit and multiple 10 gigabit links as you need them, have sub 5 millisecond latencies, have really good quality of service, and be a private secure channel into Azure rather than coming in over the private public internet and the security risks that carries. Now, these are all interesting stats, but I think one of the things that always blows me away, having started in Azure 10 years ago when we would struggle to bring up a single rack and run it in an automated fashion, is just the size of our data centers today. So I'm going to play a little video covering one of our regions and what that looks like from a DC perspective when we compare and contrast that to data centers as we used to know them. Love that video. Never get tired of watching it. But the other aspect, so that's sort of a scale piece. The other aspect of all of this is trust and security. Especially in this day and age with the amount of threats that are happening around us, whether we're running our own data centers as companies or we're relying on a cloud provider like you are with Microsoft. And trust for us kind of falls into three buckets: security, compliance, and openness. On the security front, you saw in the video a little bit about sort of physical and infrastructure security and all of the things that you'd expect to have in terms of not allowing physical breaches of our data centers. But the more interesting thing for us as IT professionals is the network and virtual machine security and how we automatically protect you and how we allow you to look at this as a very, very secure extension of your data centers. One of the cool features we have in Azure is something called Security Center. So we not only proactively block DDoS attacks, intrusion attacks and others, we give you a nice little view of that. In fact, this thing is talking about a brute force attempt to hack into a virtual machine. We track the IP address where those brute force attacks are coming for. We tell you that it's blocked. And if there was indeed a successful attack, let's say you were running a unpatched version of some software and the attacker was able to breach, you will get an alert, you'll get sort of immediate notification of those things happening. The second aspect of this is compliance and just being able to prove from a regulatory perspective and geopolitical and other perspectives, that you do have the security and the compliance needed to run and host enterprise data. We have a very broad portfolio of compliance certifications across many of our services. And if you look at that, it spans not just the United States and what we do there in terms of the compliance certifications here, but across the world and the regional certifications, let's say in the EU or in Asia, as well as industry certifications, things like the certifications from the MPAA that allow us to host media data for our media customers. Those sorts of things really help move the needle, or the HIPAA compliance around healthcare data. And those are things that we take care of for you. We provide that compliance certification and attestations and do all the work to make sure we're renewing them regularly. One of the ways in the US that this really kind of comes to the fore in terms of how you can use our cloud is the US government cloud, and the work we've done there to make sure we're really able to run in the cloud for government workloads, as well as enable all of our partners and customers to do so. So we have 6 US government regions with FedRAMP High certification, FISMA High, and CJIS compliance in 24 states that covers about 60% of the population. We have 2 of those 6 regions are Department of Defense regions that are certified to run DoD workloads, and where if you're running something there. And 100% of all the federal agencies are Microsoft Cloud customers, as well as all 50 states, encompassing about 6 million users today and over 7,000 federal, state, and local agencies. So this is a great way, especially if you're a customer selling to our partners, selling to the federal or state and local governments, being able to have all of that trust piece taken care of, and knowing that once you're running in our cloud, you're able to have all of those regulatory reasons. Any of you who are running there, have run government workloads, know how much of an onerous burden that is to satisfy everything, and we take care of a lot of that for you. The last aspect of openness is for us making sure we give you an open cloud, right? Making sure we don't just support the Microsoft stack, but we support the open ecosystem ranging from DevOps and management infrastructures all the way down to the core infrastructure, the core operating systems. Couple of the things I want to call out is our excellent support for the Hadoop ecosystem. So when we talk about big data and big data analytics, we're not talking about proprietary stacks that we want you to adopt. We're saying, hey, we have the best managed Hadoop clusters with all of the things you can do with Hive, Storm, HBase, and more running on our cloud with Linux as the underlying operating system. On the Linux front, we do a lot more than just pay lip service. You may think from a Microsoft perspective, are you guys really just sort of checking the box on Linux? But that's not the case. Over a third of our VMs running in the public cloud today are Linux VMs. 60% of new VM creation for us are Linux VMs. We have Linux support, command line interface support, and SDK support as first-class citizens, along with .NET and Windows support. On Docker and containers, that's a trend that's really sort of become mainstream in the last couple of years. We are the cloud provider that has the best relationship with Docker and the most open support of their containers and the container format, as well as having the broadest support for container orchestration with Mesos, Docker Swarm, and Kubernetes support for container orchestration. So that's kind of a view of how we are really approaching the cloud from a perspective of complete openness and transparency, which in turn helps to build that trust and allows you to run those workloads, knowing that you can always take those workloads, run them on premises, run them in a hybrid mode, or move them to another cloud if you need to. On that front, hybrid is another piece that we think is a big differentiator for Microsoft. And the reason for this is we have a rich wealth and history of supporting our enterprise customers on premises. We're the only public cloud provider to have that history. And we've brought that thoughts and the process around that to us, to our hybrid capabilities. Because hybrid doesn't just mean the ability to run your infrastructure in a hybrid mode. It's about having your identity systems interoperate between your on-premise systems and your cloud systems. It's about having your storage and your databases run in hybrid mode. It's about having your applications run in hybrid mode. So we are enabling hybrid connectivity across this whole suite of services that we have, because we know that hybrid isn't just sort of a buzzword. It's the reality of how every enterprise today is running their cloud infrastructure. Very few companies are making a big flash cut over because it just doesn't work, right? You can't kind of swap out an engine mid-flight. You have to have this iterative, incremental move of different pieces of your infrastructure over to the cloud. But what about if you go the other way and you look at, hey, I cannot run in the public cloud, but I like your sort of approach, I like your ecosystem, your APIs, how can I still use the cloud? And for that, we have made a big investment in Azure Stack. This is basically our bring Azure to your private data center offering. It's going to be GA in a couple months here. And the idea there is really provide you a very consistent application development experience between those Azure Stack devices that you run in your data centers or in a managed service provider's data center and Azure. So let's say you have 80% of your workloads run in the public cloud in the Azure regions that we have, but you have a requirement to be in Luxembourg, and we don't have a data center in Luxembourg. You can have an Azure Stack device there in Luxembourg and have all of the applications that you've built for Azure, all the provisioning, the monitoring, the management, everything look very, very seamless while deploying into a private, disconnected instance with Azure Stack. The way this is going to be deployed is through these hardware partners, Lenovo, HP, EMC, and Cisco, where you will be able to get hardware from them, either purchase or lease, which is a kind of a first for hardware, use hardware in a subscription model, as well as only pay Microsoft for the services that you use. So rather than large upfront licensing costs and things like that, you can sort of start using it and pay for what you use in terms of Azure and Microsoft services. So with that, covered kind of the global, trusted, and hybrid piece. Let's zoom in a little bit to Azure and the core services behind Azure. So before we get started, talking about compute and storage, know that Azure has this layered set of services, starting with the core infrastructure. You can, of course, use this just for compute, storage, and networking, and run your applications on virtual machines. But we have a very distinct set of differentiated managed services for web and mobile applications, for data, for IoT, and high-performance compute, media, et cetera. So these services allow you to do the workloads and run the applications you have without building everything from scratch. So you have that choice and flexibility of choosing what you need. But we're going to spend a little bit of time zooming into the core services around compute, storage, networking, and management. And in particular, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about compute and storage and how backup and DR and things like that work in Azure. So we'll cover a very high-level overview of all of the compute services, both at the infrastructure and the platform as a service layer. And we will then zoom into just infrastructure as a service. So let's start with the infrastructure compute services that we have. Of course, we have virtual machines. We'll talk a little bit more about those and the ability to run 1 to thousands of virtual machines that you deploy by yourself. But we also have 3 other services on the infrastructure scale on the side that make it easier. The first one is VM scale sets. Let's say you don't want a unique flavor of OS and application workload for every virtual machine. You just want to deploy 1,000, stateless VMs of the same kind with the same application workload running on them. We allow you to do that with what we call VM scale sets, where you can deploy the same virtual machine image over many, many times, put them behind a load balancer, have them auto scale up and down. All of that is kind of a managed service that we call VM scale sets. We also have Azure Batch, which provides you an orchestration and a job description engine that allows you to run sort of typical high-performance compute jobs that you might have been running on parallel computation locally, things like insurance workloads, financial modeling. All of those kinds of workloads can run through Azure Batch, again, as virtual machines, but where we do all the orchestration, the job routing, the job launches, and gathering that data. And lastly, we have the container service that runs on top of VM scale sets and makes container orchestration very easy. Again, when you're thinking about containers, you're looking at that because you want the flexibility of launching many containers, shutting them down, having better utilization of your VMs. Part of that is having a container orchestration service, having the virtual machine scale sets, so you can pay just for the virtual machines you need under the covers and have a very easy way to launch, destroy containers, and monitor their utilization. So this makes up the set of infrastructure compute services. We also have a set of platform services that allow you to take that infrastructure concept and extend it further. So starting with what we have around existing frameworks. We have our own framework called Cloud Services that's 7 or 8 years old at this point that allows you to run, have virtual machine isolation and performance without managing your operating system, patching, and all of that. You can just run app workloads there. One of the examples of an open ecosystem that we support in that existing frameworks bucket are things like Cloud Foundry. Right? If you're a shop that really has embraced Cloud Foundry and what they bring to you, we have excellent support for running the Cloud Foundry PaaS service on top of Azure. Moving up the curve, you have stateful or prescriptive microservices. We have a service called Service Fabric that actually runs on both Windows and Linux. It even runs on AWS as well as on-premises to really allow you to take that step up from building things and running code in virtual machines to writing to an application programming layer, writing to a sort of a microservice architecture where you can have things be described much more richly than you can have with just a bare metal infrastructure. And the last two services that we have on this front are web and mobile services. We call that the app service. So the ability to run websites in a scalable way, the ability to run notification services for your mobile applications, the ability to have workflow applications, declaratively specified and then run inside a set of managed VMs. All of that is possible with the app service. And then the last bucket we have there is serverless compute, right? So that's become another interesting trend where really companies are starting to say, do I even need the virtual machine, right? Why am I running this? If I can respond to an event or some data showing up, run for a few cycles of computation and only pay for those few cycles of computation, not have this management burden. That's sort of the serverless compute world, and our offering there is called Azure Functions. And the thing to think about when you look at all of these services, it's really not sort of a which one do I choose, but where do I start? And you can use these over time. So you might start with the virtual machines and have a lot of choice and a lot of flexibility in terms of control for your applications. But over time, you may move up the curve, start using containerize your services, start getting better utilization. As you re-architect your application, you may move to something like Service Fabric or Cloud Foundry, where you have a microservices-based architecture. And then finally, you may move up the stack to things like app service and functions and serverless compute, and really be able to build your applications without even running any infrastructure in the cloud. So this is really sort of a continuum is how we view it. You may start there at the bottommost layer because that's where you are today, but we want to make that seamless and give you the choices along the way. So let's zoom in now to virtual machines, which is what most of us sort of know and love and what we deal with on a day-to-day basis. So on the VM front, Again, from a perspective of choice and flexibility, we support Windows, multiple versions of Windows and Windows Server, as well as a bunch of different Linux distributions. And these are blessed images from those providers where we've done a certain amount of validation and making sure those things run well on our hardware. We have good support for management and configurability through frameworks like Chef and Puppet. So if you have one of those things that you're using already on your infrastructure on-premise, they continue to work. We have a large degree of flexibility in terms of virtual machine sizes, and we'll talk about that. And lastly, you don't have to start from scratch. You don't have to install Linux and then install other software, create an image. We have hundreds of images from companies ready to go in the marketplace, from things like our own SQL server where you're not installing it and configuring it, to things like Oracle or SAP, where you can really just get going with these pre-configured, pre-installed images and get a much faster start. So in order to get started with deploying VMs, one of the things that you make choices around your hardware purchase cycles are, what kind of hardware do I need to purchase? Normally, this is something where you spend a lot of time speccing hardware, doing RFPs, trying to buy the right hardware for your current and future workloads. With Azure, we make that really easy. We give you these different classes of VMs, A series for DevOps workloads, D series for your default production workloads, but then we have all of these different kinds of VMs depending on the workload you're running. If you need something with really high performance computation needs, you might choose the F series. If you need lots of memory, like half a terabyte of memory or more, you might choose the G series for your scale-up databases. If you need GPU-enabled VMs, or if you're starting to do much more interesting things around neural networks, around rendering, visualization, things like that, we have N-series VMs. And a number of these VMs support what we call premium storage, which is SSD-backed persistent storage. So many of these VMs, of course, have local SSD storage that's ephemeral, but we also have very high IOPS, up to 80,000 IOPS, up to 2 gigabytes per second, sub 5 millisecond latency, 99.9 percentile of the time with our premium disks offering. Again, a bunch of these VMs also, as we go through generations, have much faster NICs on them. Back when we started 10 years ago, a gigabit NIC was about all you could get cost effectively on a virtual machine. We moved 10 gigabit NICs many years ago. Now we're starting to move to 40G NICs on our VM families as we get there. One of the things that we also have done to make it easy for you to choose is try to normalize the performance you get, the compute performance you get, to what we call ACUs, or Azure Compute Units. So you can really start to say, hey, how much performance am I going to get? We run these standard benchmarks. We try to give you an idea of which one should you choose, not just choosing the number of cores, but because our VM families span multiple generations of Intel or AMD hardware, what performance are you actually getting out of these things? One of the announcements we made just last week was the announcement around an M series and SAP large instance support. SAP, for those of you who run that in your data centers, is probably the most demanding scale-up workload. I mean, you know probably better than I do how much those boxes cost, how much memory they need, and how much of a pain they are to sort of go through migration cycles and upgrade cycles with them. We've been working very, very closely with SAP for the last couple of years, and we're pleased to announce sort of having excellent certified VM sizes for SAP, and especially SAP HANA, as in terms of having all the way up to 3.5 terabytes of RAM for our M series, which are open and available for not just SAP, but any other kind of database workload. And then SAP specific instances that can go up to 60 terabytes of RAM for an SAP HANA instance. So we are able now to run the largest SAP HANA installations in the world, and you should know that if we can run that, we can pretty much run any other workload in the world on top of our infrastructure. One of the aspects of compute is having excellent storage to go with it. We've taken this is a recent launch for us in February. We've taken a lot of the complexity around managing data and your data on block storage out of the circle, right? In a way, in the old days, you'd have to kind of configure storage accounts, manage scale for storage separately from compute. Now we've made it a very simple declarative model that along with your virtual machine, you declare how much storage you need, how much throughput and IOPS you need, and we do all of the management of that persistent storage underneath the covers. So you can have a very simple experience. You can also have very good granular control of permissions on these. Why this is interesting, by the way, is because we want to give you the flexibility to shut down your VMs when you don't need them, but not lose the data stored, right? Like data persists. You tend to keep those data disks or operating system disks for years or forever, but you don't necessarily want to be running compute all the time, right? You may have a burst workload that 3 days a month you're spinning up lots of VMs, doing computation, constructing some aggregate data and then shutting it down. So this allows you to really do that. We're able to operate at very large scale. Those VM scale sets we were talking about, you can now have up to 10,000 disks per region, and that's even a soft limit. We have customers now that have 30,000 disks running in a single Azure region. We allow you with this disk format and the managed disk to easily upgrade between VM sizes and disk types. Let's say you start your database workload on a standard disk and you realize, oh, that's not performant. I need more IOPS, I need more scale. It's a couple of clicks and a reboot to go transparently from a hard disk back disk to an SSD back disk. No data movement. We do all of that underneath the covers for you. And lastly, of course, there's good benefits around higher availability and manageability in the cases where you're able to take advantage of that. So that's kind of a quick tour of compute and storage. One of the things that I want to kind of tie back to the Zerto conference and the Zerto theme is, where do things fit in here, right? And we're really talking about disaster recovery and backup. And even in the Azure world, you need to look at both of these things, right? Whether you do that through first-party services that Azure provides or third-party services like Zerto, you really really need to make sure you're thinking about how are you backing up your data in an app-consistent way so you can do point-in-time recovery. If there's any kind of corruption from an app bug, you're able to recover from that. But you also need to think about disaster recovery, and that's really interesting from the perspective of a hybrid scenario where you're still running workloads on premises, and maybe you can get rid of your secondary DC and the expense associated with that and just use the public cloud as a DR location. The thing you don't want to do, and I love the fact that there's always a Dilbert cartoon for every talk I ever give, is have that be your disaster recovery plan. So what do we provide along these lines? We provide two first-party services I'll run through and then talk about the differences that we have with a partner like Zerto. We have our own Azure Backup Service, which is a first-party, cloud-first data protection service for both on-premises VMs and in Azure VMs. So you have the ability to back up your data from Hyper-V or VMware on premises to Azure. You can do backups inside Azure. And it's a VS, volume snapshot, consistent snapshot-based backup. You can do item-level recovery. You can just mount and get back certain files. And you can have a very, very long retention period for compliance and the like. On the site recovery piece, that's what we call our DR service. And the idea is you can have your site being replicated to Azure, right, and being able to be ready to go. Either have just the data replicated running in storage and bring up the VMs when you need them, or have your VMs ready to go as warm spares where you can fail over at a moment's notice. So, and Azure's site recovery, or site recovery in general, also helps to function as a migration tool, right? It's a great way to dip your toe in the water, try this out, slowly push some of your load from your on-premises data centers to our data centers, make sure everything works, and then do a failover as a form of migration without a lot of downtime and kind of data copying and things like that we're not usually able to do. And we even support migration from EC2. So if you're already running in AWS and you want to be able to move things over, have a multi-cloud strategy, we're able to do that with Azure Site Recovery. And one of the things that we recently launched is what we call a hybrid use benefit. And the notion there is, let's say you're already a Microsoft customer, you're already running Windows servers in your data center, you're able to bring the licenses and the cost of those licenses that you already purchased to our cloud. No other cloud provider allows this, and save up to 40% on the cost of your VMs because you've already paid for those licenses. Why wouldn't you use them and bring those licenses portably to a public cloud provider when you're no longer using them on premises? So that's called the hub or the hybrid use benefit. It's a fairly recent launch. So if you haven't heard of that before, it's a good one to check out in terms of reducing your TCO on Azure. And the hybrid use benefit applies to any provider. It's not about Azure Site Recovery. You can do that with Zerto as well. So how does Zerto fit into the picture for us? We have a long history of supporting a vibrant partner ecosystem and making sure, even when we have first-party services like backup and site recovery, there's plenty of space for differentiation for our partners to build much richer feature sets than we do. And that's really what Zerto has done. They have this awesome, continuous replication technology that's not snapshot-based. So their RPO and RTO is better than our services. They have the notion of one-to-many replication now, which is really great because you can start to add, if you're already using Zerto for your site-to-site recovery or your DR plan, you can add Azure as another DR location, have the replication happen to both. So it's a great way to kind of dip your toe in the water, try it out without getting rid of your existing DR plan, and run it side by side for a while and see whether Azure is doing the job for you. And lastly, we have both fail over into Azure with Zerto as well as fail back to your on-premises, which is important, right? You may not be choosing to migrate to Azure. You may just be trying to use it for a failover location. And of course, if you do that, you need to be able to fail back. As I was saying, there's quite a bit of differentiation between what Zerto does and what Azure Site Recovery does. So it's really up to you to kind of try the services, pick the one that meets your needs as a customer. And that's always been sort of our philosophy with this, and why we're very, very happy to partner with companies doing innovative things like Zerto in this DR space. So that's sort of my kind of wrap up on compute and that zoom in. What I want to do for the next few minutes is zoom out a little bit and kind of look at a different aspect, which is, hey, all of that talk about infrastructure was great. What is the cloud enabling me to do that I couldn't do before? And one of the best places to look at, or best things to look at, where the reality is already here, is IoT and how companies are using IoT. Companies that you've heard of that are everyday names that we use their systems every day. So these are examples of companies that have already deployed IoT and industrial IoT, manufacturing IoT scenarios on top of Azure and are running right now. So I want to walk you through a few stories here in terms of what we've done and show you a couple of quick videos that probably get the point across better than me rambling. So the first one is Rolls-Royce. And what Rolls-Royce has done, now odds are if you took an international flight to get here, you were in an airplane with Rolls-Royce engines. And downtime for airplanes is a massive problem, right? So the longer a plane stays out of commission, the more money the airline loses, the more money the engine manufacturer has to spend in terms of getting people out somewhere. So what Rolls-Royce is doing is sort of two things. One, they're collecting all of the sensor data that gets generated during a flight, terabytes of data, and pulling it up to Azure and processing that data for every engine that they sell around the world, and starting to do two things. One is predictive maintenance. So starting to tell people like, hey, in a couple flights, in a few hours of flight time, you should really plan to have this aircraft come in for maintenance, for routine maintenance. So you're able to catch problems before they happen, rather than having a breakdown in a remote airport that's very expensive for both the airline and the engine manufacturer. The second thing that they're doing is using that data to provide real-time insights into fuel consumption and other things, so pilots can dynamically change how and what they do in near real time, so they can actually start to have benefits for cost savings for airlines. Another example is ThyssenKrupp, the elevator company. They run million plus elevators around the world. Odds are you were in a ThyssenKrupp elevator or a ThyssenKrupp escalator even just getting here to this conference. So let's look at their story and what they're doing with us.
With 3 billion people moving into the world's cities in the next 3 decades, the world needs tall buildings, and tall buildings need elevators. I'm Dr. Rory Smith with ThyssenKrupp Elevator, a leading global manufacturer. Maintaining over 1.1 million of these machines annually and keeping them running safely and reliably 24/7 is our job one. We wanted to better compete in our industry by offering dramatically increased uptime. So we're taking preventative maintenance a step further to predictive and even preemptive service. We teamed up with Microsoft and CGI to harness the Internet of Things, to collect data by connecting the sensors and systems in each of our elevators to the cloud. Microsoft Azure draws this data into a central cloud-based dashboard for a real-time view of key performance indicators. And Power BI provides rich data visualization, so we know which cabs need service and when. Microsoft Azure Machine Learning feeds data into dynamic predictive models so that elevators will actually be able to anticipate which repairs they need. Using an app on mobile devices in the field or the dashboard at one of our corporate control centers, all of our technicians see the same real-time information. Now we have the ability to use live data to define a needed repair before a breakdown happens, reducing costs for ourselves and for our customers, raising elevator reliability to new heights. That's the Internet of ThyssenKrupp's things, and it's here right now.
That's a great story because it's not something you think about. We ride in elevators every day, and we don't really think about that industry as being transformed by IoT and what's happening there. Another interesting company that's doing, it's a smaller startup company called eSmart Systems out of Norway, and they're doing much better smart grid management around demand response, around maintenance again, with power grids, right? So again, large existing infrastructure being enhanced by IoT and by machine learning. So they have all of these systems up and running for their customers there, but they have a very, very cool kind of project that they started last year around doing maintenance through automated drones. So let's play that video as well.
eSmart Systems Connected Drone adds intelligence and mobility to big data analysis, and it's a game changer. The current methods of power line inspections are slow, expensive, and dangerous. Connected Drone is replacing manual processes with Azure-powered machine intelligence. Drones are sent out on beyond line-of-sight missions. Data is collected using multiple sensors and streamed to Azure. Vast amounts of data is sent through power line optimized deep learning algorithms. Connected Drone updates component registries and pinpoints faults and weaknesses in this vital infrastructure. Connected Drone is feeling the pulse of the power grid and keeps the power flowing.
This one for me is particularly cool because they're actually doing real-time machine learning and sort of image recognition for looking at power lines and looking at for faults automatically, right? So this is a tedious job maintaining power infrastructure. And again, another interesting thing of how we're able to change this. So hopefully this was a good kind of a whirlwind tour of what we have and what we can provide for you today with your infrastructure, with your virtual machines, with your compute and storage, as well as sort of a quick look at what we're starting to do in things like IoT, ML, and data analytics, and being able to kind of really look at new workloads. So thank you. I'm happy to take some questions. Also, I don't want to keep you from lunch, which I think is right now. So thanks again, folks.